My name's Rob McGinnis. I'm the senior land use specialist working out of the Charlottesville, Virginia office, and I cover Albemarle and Greene counties. For those who don't know, Piedmont Environmental Council, we're 53 years in operation, and our 9 county service area extends from Loudoun County down to Albemarle. One city, which is the city of Charlottesville. So there's really 10 localities that we work in, including the incorporated towns in multiple counties. We are a kind of an interesting blend of we're a certified land trust. We do a lot of conservation work, easements. We have easement projects, and we actually hold easements. And then on the land use side, everything from comprehensive plan updates to zoning text amendments, zoning map amendments, project reviews, and that's the work that I do. And then PEC does work at the state level, particularly on data centers and also renewable energy. So we actually show up at the General Assembly with bills in hand, working with patrons. We weren't very successful in getting many bills on data centers through. Really, almost all of them were either killed off early or were vetoed. I'm not going to go into legislation, but just so you know that we operate at a high level. In terms of data centers, Julie Bolthouse, who couldn't be here, she's the director of land use. She's deeply involved in data center work, and PEC basically was one of the leaders in establishing the Data Center Reform Coalition. So there's scores of other NGOs that are under that umbrella and have been working hard at the state level and at the locality level, addressing data centers and their impacts. At the state level, it would probably appear as though we really don't like data centers and we don't want to see them built. That's not really the case. What we're really concerned about is energy and the amount of energy that has to be generated to power these data centers. And I'm going to touch on that, but I'm going to focus on what's going on at the local level. So we do a lot of work in that space. At the locality level, since I've been at PEC, we've never said we oppose data centers. We in fact use data centers. I use it every day. PEC, everything is on the cloud. It's just the way life is. AI is a bit of a game changer, and that's a little bit different. But so let me just keep going here. So I'm going to just basically focus a little bit on the background on data centers. And you just stop me if you have a question instead of waiting till the end if there's anything. And I don't know whether they want to chat a question. If they do, and you'll go see it, and you can just ask me. Because all I can see is my presentation. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about evaluating local data center projects and then recommendations for best practices. Why are data centers different? And obviously the AI boom has caused an explosive growth in data centers, in particular in Virginia. It's rather remarkable. Then data centers can fit in this room, and they do, and they're here now in our community. UVA will build a data center that won't be in a room. It'll be in a smaller building at Fontaine. There's accessory data centers. So what we're focused on are data centers. So one way to look at it is Albemarle County just passed a stopgap zoning text amendment regulating through a special use permit in industrial districts and all commercial districts, data centers that are, they regulate all data centers in commercial districts, and then data centers that are over 40,000 square feet are by special use permit. So think 40,000 square feet and larger is what we're really thinking about. And many of them are much, much larger. And so those buildings are unusual in their scale, particularly in certain contexts. They use more energy than just about anything. And a campus of data centers, like where Louisa is, there's 2 major data center campuses that are being built over there, approved and built. You got power requirements that are beyond manufacturing plants or steel mills. They're tremendous amounts of power. And then you've got on-site backup power requirements, and there'll be some images in here that think, think either a box car or a shipping container size generators and multiple generators for each one of these data centers. And they have to be turned on and tested. So you can imagine, Loudoun County, you know, I can't remember the last count, but it's well over 100 data centers. And if the power goes out there, they're all on at the same time and running. And they can, as an emergency generator, run as long as they need to. So that's a major issue, and they're almost all diesel generators. And then what we're seeing more of is that these facilities tend to cluster. That is, I just sort of talked about the cumulative impact. So you have it's not just this data center, it's 20 data centers together in one place. So you want to think about cumulative impact. I'm not going to go too much into the power requirements. In terms of the megawatts, Virginia's on the far left. We're well beyond what you see across the world in terms of what Virginia is. And there's reasons why Virginia attracts these, and I won't go into a lot of detail about that if you want to know more, but this map is already outdated. Okay.
So go ahead, Todd, if you want that question.
Muted.
We're having trouble hearing you. Looks like he unmuted. Just 1 second. We could hear John earlier.
Have somebody else say something.
Yeah,
See if
someone
it-
else?
Yeah, it may be on his end because I can't hear him either.
Yeah. Maybe check your mic. Which mic you're commuted to or connected to.
Or you can just,
Yeah, we can
Chat it.
continue on and, yeah, send it in the chat. That works as well.
so this map that you're looking at here is available through the Virginia Economic Development Partnership, and which is promoting data centers, and this is already outdated. You don't even see the data centers that are being developed in Louisa, for example. So PEC has an interactive map. We have grant funding to fund the work that we do on data centers at a state level. So we have staff that track these projects. It's not perfect. Things occur, it's a live, evolving, market out there. So trying to get a handle on it. So you can see in the middle there, it says Charlottesville, and you can see the two dots off to the right. Those are the two in Louisa County, those campuses in Louisa County that are proposed. And I don't know what this construction status is.
Looks like your map might answer his question, but he wanted to be sure he heard you right. He said, did you say that Albemarle has more than 100 data centers?
No, Loudoun County.
Loudoun County.
Yeah. No. I don't know how many data centers are in Albemarle County. UVA certainly has one or more. There may be some, they can be inside buildings as accessory data centers, and you would not know that they're there unless, phone companies, banks, but nothing of scale.
So that term data center is not just like any server room. It has a certain definition, like size definition.
That's a great, let me circle back to that when I start talking about best practices, because that's an important question. So this is a National Renewable Energy Lab map on data center infrastructure across the United States, and it's sort of like, wow. You can see the big I'll zoom in on Virginia in a second, but you can see where data center, out in the West and in some major market cities, all the red and orange and umber lines, those are all electrical transmission. And red is 735 and greater. What we get around here is 765 kilovolt lines. And then you can see 500 and 344. You need a minimum of 230 kilovolts to supply a large scale data center. So if you want to know where they're going to go, you just look for the transmission lines. And the other that you look for is fiber. And fiber is running down 29 and it's running right into this city in multiple locations. It's coming down 22 in the east, for example. Um, I won't go into, in Greene County, it would be on 29. Um, and so you can see this is sort of zooming in. It's hard to see, but the white, if you see the word Richmond and on the left-hand side, that's the fiber that's running through Charlottesville from 29 north. That's running north-south. So in Virginia, about 60 million square feet existing or being constructed, and there's another 200 million square feet approved in the pipeline. So the thought was, oh, these data centers are going to stick to Loudoun. They'll be around Richmond. They're definitely being developed in Culpeper, for example. They're already there, have been, and more will show up again because there's transmission and fiber right there on 29. And then there may be right now one project or more in Albemarle, but we don't know. Usually they're going into the Economic Development Authority or some other entity and having initial discussions. We won't hear about it until it gets daylighted. I don't know what's going on I know what's going on in Louisa. They've got two big campuses that they're working on. I can't talk about, I don't know about Fluvanna, but what we're hearing about more and more because of pushback in other parts of the state, some other factors, the data center developers are looking out in other regions in the state, including Southwest and rural counties. So there's a data center on the left. We have a drone pilot. Those are our images. You can see on top all the cooling equipment on top, and then down below on both sides are those tractor trailer size generators. So they're an industrial use, very intensive. There's many other things that go on those sites that I'll cover, but essentially you're seeing natural gas plants in Virginia, peaker plants, they are supplying power, but more and more the infrastructure, the electrical infrastructure from coal-fired power plants is being built up now from West Virginia and Ohio. And they're building out those lines. They're 500 and 765 big, huge towers coming into Virginia, Northern Virginia, and I'll show you one line that will impact part of the PDC. Again, what you're looking at in the middle there, that's probably a 230 kilovolt line right there. So I won't go into this, but so there's the Dominion service area-ish on the right. And already, you've gone, I mean, it's doubling in the 20-year forecast. And it's worse than that, actually. The other thing to keep in mind is when these projects are built, localities should be thinking about the fact that what comes with these projects isn't just the data center, but it may be it's likely substations. And the other is the actual transmission line. So in Loudoun County, there's all these webs of transmission lines that are being added to support the data centers, and that has a land use impact. There's other impacts. However, Dominion, if somebody says, I want that power, they're obligated by law to provide the power. They can't say no. So here, July 2024 to December 24, the doubling of energy that is contracted in Virginia. It's pretty astounding. I'm going to skip over this. This is how basically they request power and you go through that process. So why do they end up why do localities find data centers attractive? One is they don't create a lot of traffic. They don't require schools to be expanded. They are some jobs, but not a lot. During construction, there's a lot of jobs. When you have them clustered as many as in, for example, Loudon, there are significant jobs up there because those specialists service all those data centers, enough there to create a sort of a small army of technicians. There's opportunity to attract additional economic development. And then the big reason for some localities is simply tax revenue. Though if you follow data centers, a locality will remain unnamed. It's been in the news, but I won't pick on them, but I don't think it's in our PDC. They basically expected a certain amount of revenue from that data center. It was sold to them, the developer. So some developers develop these and then there's spaces leased to one or more entities for their servers. There's others that just build their own. So AWS, they build, they develop and build their own. They're the only ones that use those. So in this case, this developer said, oh, we're going to, this is the likely amount of tax revenue you're going to get. Lo and behold, one of the major users of that space said, we're a bank and banks don't pay beep-hole tax. All that revenue, we're talking millions of dollars just vaporized. And they're left with, oh, wow. So here's a good way to look at it. I believe the number is Loudoun County's revenue from data centers is 30% of their budget. So there are people talking about a data center bubble that's being generated by AI. And so what happens when the market might shrink or contract and that revenue starts to shrink and contract, yet the ratepayers are still, they've already paid for the transmission lines and the substations. So evaluating local data center projects, and this is the work that I do. I don't deal with the larger. So again, I'm sorry that Julie couldn't be here because she's pretty passionate about what the big picture is. So you need to know what the right questions are. You can't really develop an ordinance unless you know what kind of questions to ask and how to evaluate a project. And even if you do have an existing ordinance, I will tell you that the industry is evolving fast enough that, ordinances they could be outdated. So you need to know how big they're going to be. So when a project comes, how large, what are the power requirements? What are those impacts? Even though the locality is not supplying the power, it would be important to know how much power they're using, because that could impact the sort of localized grid. And then substations, how many, where are they going to go? This county has seen substations that are being upgraded, one down Old Lynchburg Road, that's likely being driven by these infrastructure changes. So taking an existing substation and that goes through the locality. Those go through a special use permit. There's regulatory review at the local level for those. Transmission lines that I spoke to, you really, are they going to have to build like a spur line from an existing substation or build one on a transmission line over to the facility? And that's not uncommon. And as I said earlier, you need a minimum of 230 kilovolt lines. So those 40,000 square foot and smaller data centers that Albemarle County just approved in its zoning text amendment, they don't need a substation and they connect directly into a distribution line. So here's a substation, that's power, that's part of a larger energy network for data centers, and they're not small. These are quite large. And then there's a 500 kilovolt line, so you can see what they look like. A lot of these, they're trying to run these towers. They're either rebuilding these lines, taking the 230 and now putting up a 500, or they're using the same right of way. But again, there are all kinds of impacts from whether they're wrecking and rebuilding or just adding new ones. And here's a 230 smaller line. So we map the transmission lines, and you can see there's fiber. You can see fiber running from Gordonsville all the way in from the east. You can see it kind of all heading towards Charlottesville and UVA, running north of Crozet on 240, for example, and then south on 29, north on 29. And then I monitor for Albemarle Green at PJM interconnection or the transmission projects. So we monitor those, and these were early proposals. All of these are being driven by data centers. And so you can see these are PJM calls for proposals every year, and then developers make proposals to meet whatever needs PJM interconnection has identified, and then those are evaluated, and then they shortlist and they get down to proposals. And this was almost 3 years ago. And you can see the wreck and rebuilding of transmission lines all along the Southwest Mountains into the city, going over the mountains over to Dooms. And we've already had transmission line wreck and rebuilds already. They've already been completed in the southern part of the county, going over into the valley. So this is the project that went through the PJM regional cluster, and they make horrible maps. It's just a mind-boggling why they do that. They just want to make it so hard for anybody to figure out what's going on. So this project is a regional project, and it basically Yeet on the right-hand side, the green line. Yeet is in Fauquier County, and Joshua Falls is just outside of Lynchburg on the right side of Lynchburg. So there's a big transmission project all across the sort of Midwest at the top, and then this one going through Virginia and basically going through North Anna. And so that's a 765 huge towers. And the piece that I got Scottsville there, you can see it will run through Albemarle County. And it looks like it's going to be a new alignment and not along an existing one.
I had a question.
Yeah.
So just to be clear, data centers typically locate near transmission lines or substations.
The ones that are 40,000, greater than, let's say 40,000 square feet need to be near a transmission line, not right on one, but they need to, it costs a lot of money to build a transmission line. So, and we all pay for it. The ratepayers pay for those lines. The Amazon, the richest companies in the world do not pay for those transmission projects. We do. And so, they just need to be near there. Then they build the substation if it needs to be at both ends. So the terms, they need to build two or one, depends upon where they are and where they're clustered. So I took an available online map of existing transmission lines that were a much better map. And this is what Yeet to Joshua Falls looks like. And you can see this is Albemarle right here. Here's Louisa. Here's Green right here. This is Nelson down here. Here's Buckingham, Fluvanna. So this is going to come down, go right through Louisa because there's North Anna right there. And there are a bunch of data centers there. And then come down and go into Hanover, back out again, go through Goochland, and then eventually into Fluvanna to the Cunningham substation, and then run down, and this is Scottsville right here. And then we just don't know exactly what that alignment will be, but it looks like it's going to be running along the James. So the existing transmission that is in the lower part of the county is all this right here. You can see it running down here. Also, where those transmission lines are is also where large scale, utility scale solar projects want to be located. And they also need substations. So if you followed Woodridge Solar, which is being built now, it's well over 1,000 acres behind the fence, 138 megawatts. That it was everybody was told, oh, that's 25 to 30,000 houses. No, it's not. It's one data center because that's likely who they'll sell that power to is a data center.
Another question. Do
Sure.
you think the demand for power related to data centers is overstated due to the practice of data centers developers shopping for multiple locations when ultimately they will not use all of the power demanded by these multiple requests?
That's a great question, and I wish Julie was here because she could probably address that. I don't, it gets into the larger market conditions and where AI is going. There is a concern that there's going to be an overbuild out and then the market contracts and then we're left sort of holding the tax revenue goes away and the ratepayers have paid for the infrastructure. So that is a problem. And so it could be overstated, but many of the numbers that you're looking at are not PEC's numbers or the Sierra Club. It's numbers that are being generated by PJM and by Dominion and AEP. They need to know what they think they're going to have to supply, but they could be backup generators. So there's a whole house generator on the left, and there's a big old generator inside of a noise attenuating envelope. So these are big generators. There was a time ago that DEQ was looking at Department of Environmental Quality, relaxing the air quality requirements for localities in Northern Virginia in case they needed to run all those generators at the same time. And that got killed. There was a lot of pushback on that. And I'll get into it. So there's different tiers of generators and really the non-emergency generators are tier 4, whereas emergency generators are tiers 1 through 3, most are 2. And basically that tiering is all about what's coming out of there. What are they emitting? And so it's one by itself versus 24 on one building versus 20 times 24, it's a big deal. So this is Loudoun, Eastern Loudoun, and the number of generators are all up there. And then we just mapped, where you have vulnerable populations, school children, nursing homes, elderly, so that air quality can have impacts. So here's a great example of data centers right next to the Washington Old Dominion Trail, because there's a transmission running right up that trail in Northern Virginia and near of sports fields and houses. Then we're looking at now, because of the challenge of supplying enough energy for the growth of the data center industry is causing a lot of investigation into on-site generation. So one would be, on-site gas generators that would supply the power, not the emergency power. It would be supplying just the power that they need. And so that all the way to small modular nuclear reactors. So they're stretching as far as they can. There's a project that was proposed in Pittsylvania County because Mountain Valley Pipeline runs through there, and they'd be able to just tap directly into Mountain Valley, and they provide their own power by having a whole bunch of gas powered plants right there, and then they'd have a data center campus. And there's a lot of pushback on that. They've had to shrink it, and I don't know if they've gone away completely, but so there's a lot of studies going on, this is rapidly occurring. And so there are entities going in trying to understand what's happening with environmental impacts. If you're paying attention to what's going on in Washington right now, there's a lot of talk about energy emergency and reducing the amount of environmental impact assessments that would go on, and it's pretty troubling. Compatibility with adjacent users, things to think about, the size of the facility, fencing, security. All these projects have high level security, not anti-terrorism force protection, but close. So you can't drive a truck through their fence. That's how. So if you go on 29 North and you look at Culpeper, you'll see this big box up there, and you'll see these fences that are incredibly hardened fences so that vehicles cannot run into them and detonate a bomb in a box truck, for example. So you need to think about electrical infrastructure. They will use eminent domain if they need to, Dominion and AP if they have to supply the, it's going on now. They can cause land prices to spike. That's what's happened in Loudon. I mean, the land values, I can't go into details, but it's substantial. So that, if you're waiting for the data center instead of the housing project that might have, 20% affordable housing, you're going to see the data center project because the value of the land is so high. So it just is self-perpetuating in those kinds of, we talked about fiber. Complementary uses tend to be energy generation, industrial and office flex. So what Louise has done is a technology overlay district, and that's the right thing to do. You want those data centers to go in the right place, whether those TODs they're not the only ones. There's other TODs within that county. Greene County has in their comp plan, a tech flex R&D district, and they cited in their future land use map about 500 acres total. They're both, one's just to the west of Ruckersville, north touches 33, and the other one's on the right of 29 north of Ruckersville. It was explicitly stated in the comp plan that this was for these kinds of industrial uses, including data centers. So they were intentionally, pushing the data centers into a place where they would be a better fit. And then incompatible residential, mixed use, commercial. I took just the existing zoning map for Albemarle and looked at all the light industrial, and the commercial districts, and then mapped the 230 and larger transmission lines, and then where the fiber is, and you can see where they could possibly go. And then you look at where the residential districts are they abutting up to them? So all that siting is really, really important.
Are there large noise impacts?
Yeah, I'll get into that. Yeah, can be. Look, noise. So noise comes from, forget about the construction period for a moment. Just think about when they operate. So all those chillers and air compressors, they make noise. They're on top. They're cooling the facility, if that's how they're cooling it. And then you've got the generators when they're being tested or an emergency situation. So they make noise. And then, I don't know whether we have any cryptocurrency facilities anywhere in Virginia. I don't know the answer to that. And I don't hear the senior staff in PEC talking about it here, but when you write an ordinance, you need to think about it because it could happen, and they tend to be noisier. So you want to avoid allowing data centers in close proximity to particularly residential development. Require a noise study up front rather than going through a costly battle to enforce noise ordinance. I will tell you that in Culpeper, they have an existing noise ordinance, but it never anticipated data centers. So you have these very low vibrating frequencies that are very different. So we found an engineer who is an expert on noise, measuring noise, the devices for measuring noise, and how noise is attenuated. And basically, that guy made a recommendation to the I think it was the county, not the city. You need to rewrite your noise ordinance to comply. If you go by the current ordinance, then the facility will likely have more problems, and even though they're going to be in compliance. So that's really important. And then the noise attenuation technology out there, and it needs to be required in the ordinance. So there's acoustic barriers, sound absorbing materials, how you place your generator. You'll see some applications and they'll say, all our generators are going to be over here on the other side of the building facing away from, let's say, a public street or, housing that's, 500 feet away. For example, the stopgap ordinance in the county You can only test your generators Monday through Friday between the hours of, let's say, 10 and 4. No weekend testing, they can't do that. And so what that brings is enforcement. So some localities that are more rural, they may not have a robust enforcement capability where a more developed locality with more staff might be able to enforce those when there's complaints. Water. Um, I want to say that the stopgap ordinance for the county requires water reuse, but even with water reuse, you still need makeup water. So you really need to understand that. And given the way going north from the northern part of this county, going into Green, the drought conditions they're bad. And so we could go through long dry periods. And so Green's trying to maybe build a reservoir. They don't have a reservoir. Orange might tap into Green's reservoir, but trying to build a data center up there that needs lots and lots of water could have a significant impact on that rural county's water supply for Stannardsville and their development area. What would it do to, Ravenna Water and Sewer Authority? It just depends how big they are. Are they making projections on their water supply planning, accommodating potential for a huge water users like these? Cooling techniques, air cooling is out there, but they still remove the heat through cooling towers, so there is water consumption. Closed loop cooling design, air cooled chillers, no water loss. There's different technologies out there. Liquid cooling, which is, it's not water, it's a different kind of material. And then there's hybrid, it all matters. When you want the ordinance to say, the applicant needs to say how it's going to cool its data centers and how much water they're going to need. Um, and you can see there's some other more sustainable approaches like rainwater harvesting and treatment and cooling. And so you really need to address water in your ordinance.
That, since we have a humid climate, humid summers.
Yeah.
I would think that cooling in this way is not as efficient if you're already in a humid climate, because you also have to I assume you have to keep these systems pretty dry. Like you
Yeah.
can't have humid climate inside of a
Right.
computer room, right? So are we especially vulnerable in terms of water use in Virginia versus, say, data centers in Texas, where it's drier climate?
The short answer is, I believe yes, but I'm not an engineer, so I can't answer that. To give you one example, UVA is using a ground loop system for heating and cooling their data center and other buildings. And so, and that's the environment, cooling and heating that environment, which is a pretty, that's just a very sustainable way to cool and heat if they need to, which is more likely cooling all the time. There are conditioned spaces where, people, they're not in those server rooms. There's office kind of spaces and other kinds of spaces that need to be heated and cooled in a more normal way. But so you can see this is just we met with Loudoun County. It's called Loudoun Water, and asked them, can you share your data on how data centers are using water? So they're moving more to, potable water has now surpassed reclaim use, and that's up 250%. That's a lot. So, and I monitor water supply in the Potomac River Basin, and they're up against the wall as well. It's likely that they'll start using former quarries to hold water up in Northern Virginia. Prohibit use of potable water or cap water consumption in an ordinance. Prohibit flushing in large quantity refills during summer and early fall. If allowing the consumption of water require use of reclaimed water. So these are things that when I see, like Albemarle is going to write this big data center ordinance, this is what we'll be looking at. How will these issues be addressed? And I just would say that, because the way water is supplied, it is already a regional water supply situation because it's supplying water to, RWSA is supplying water to the city, to the county, urban areas, and also to UVA. So what happens to water matters, not just to Albemarle County, just because that's where the reservoirs are. Um, uh, Noise, blow down, the capacity wastewater treatment facility to handle. So that's wastewater. They don't just dump that on the ground. So that's important. Though the plumes from the cooling towers look unsightly, they're harmless, but some people get really triggered when they see those. This is an important one. Consider training for first responders for fires at data centers. There's batteries and how to get into the facility because they're locked up tight. You can't just drive into them. They have security, wayfinding, um, you know, um, so there's that. It's really important. That may, you may need additional equipment depending upon who the locality is to fight a fire in a data center. And then obviously the local inspectors need additional training for, those are the building inspectors and the, um, um, to understand, um, what's going on in a data center right from the beginning. Yeah, so what's actually being transported off-site through smoke? Um, I don't exactly know, but my understanding from talking with Julie, it depends on what's in that building, but you can imagine all the electrical equipment in there that's got all kinds of, we're talking, different kinds of metals and, I would imagine it would not be anywhere, could be quite toxic. Um, So there's an issue with fuel storage. That's another one. So because they don't have a diesel line coming to the site, you're actually storing diesel fuel on site. And you need to think about that and what happens when there is a spill. Is it going to transport into a waterway, down a yard, an inlet in a parking lot? They need secondary containment, overfill protections. Um, and they need to be, that bulk fuel needs to be somewhere else away from the generators. It can't be right next to the generators, just given the nature of what's going on with generators. So recommendations for best practices. What's happened early on were basically the applicant would, there's a great example of a data center that was submitted um, um, and I'm getting close to finish, that was submitted in the town of Warrenton. And the engineer that submitted the plan just basically blacked out the site plan. It's like it was all redacted. And they're like, wait a minute, what's secret about where your fuel storage goes and parking and, where the generator, why? And they said, oh, it's all proprietary. And that was just, the lawyers had a field day and they said, that's not true. There's much that's not proprietary that you should be able to see, a locality should be able to see. And, you know, you just want to stay away from, we have proprietary information, therefore, and so the ordinance needs to be clear about what's expected on the site plan. And if it's a special use permit, what's on that space, what's identified as special use permit. So, I mean, this is a full blown, I believe, a site plan submission. So you want to be able to see, you don't need to see what's inside the building for a site plan review, but you need all the other components, site circulation, fencing, what's protected resources, just like any other industrial, where's the substation going? Where's the, where are the transmission lines going into the site and back out of? All those components you need to be able to see. Above 40,000 square feet require a special use permit. Um, every ordinance needs a definition for a data center to be very clear about what it is. And address on-site power generation allowed or prohibited. And I talked about all there should be a noise study. They should be submitting information on cooling, water use, all of that, projected energy use. And you can look at this, I'll make this available. It's such a changing, fast changing environment, but these are some ordinances that you could be looking at. If you're looking at an ordinance. And then signing, this is best governance. NDAs, could be really problematic. There's a lot of information that can be shared that's not proprietary, and you should be able to see it. Also, when these projects come in, actually interfacing with the electric utility provider, water provider, that should be part of the process. DEQ oversees air permitting for generators. But it's important to identify the best locations for these and away from incompatible uses. And I'll stop there, running 5 minutes over.
Thank you so much, Rob.
There are more questions.
We had one comment.
Yeah, Jim.
Can you read that? Yeah.
Yeah, so Jim, I saw that. I guess my comment on green, since the Board of Supervisors spoke and said no data centers, is whether your ordinance should explicitly prohibit data centers to avoid misunderstandings, because it's in your comp plan. It's an interesting, it's more a question on our part whether that should be done. So that's something that, when I pay attention to green, again, green was right in creating the TechFlex R&D, and to intentionally drive those facilities where they need to be and away from, like that photograph, that housing. So, so there may be some vulnerability there. And what is?
We already read that one. Did you have a question, Logan?
Yeah, I was just gonna follow up on, so when we're talking about data centers, is this data center boom specifically linked to the AI stuff? I'm not as well versed, but it feels like data centers have been around for a bit, and they are sort of like you were saying, separate from like just a normal server.
Yeah.
So there's some sort of scaling to these things. I don't know if you could talk about that a little bit.
My understanding is that AI is definitely driving the sort of very rapid increase in data center development, but it's not exclusive. But AI, people see AI and they think, oh, I'm gonna use it to do a query on, I'm opening up my browser. A good way to look at AI is how it's being integrated into like the biotech and health sciences, or AI is integrated into defense intelligence. So, the Ravenna station with the National Ground Intelligence Center, the Defense Intelligence Agency, and then the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. Are they using AI? Probably. A company a year and a half ago moved from Silicon Valley over into the Discovery Research Park, and they use AI to work on defense related. I don't think anybody knows the answer yet. I mean, we try to monitor the market analysts that are out there, from a market analysis perspective, where all this is going, but there's no question that AI is a major driving factor. And with economic development, and there's Go Virginia, at the Virginia level, the level of economic development is basically identified from Fauquier to Charlottesville City, a defense intelligence innovation corridor. And then locally, you're looking at an innovation corridor that's really UVA going all the way up into Greene County to, and so these localities, Greene works together with Albemarle, works together with UVA Foundation, works together with UVA and the city of Charlottesville and the economic development authorities, all have been working together for quite some time on those sectors growing those sectors, and AI is definitely a big chunk of it. It's there.
The very beginning, say that, or you said that you would talk more about why Virginia in particular has so much, what was the term used, operational IT load?
Yeah.
That you had that graph where Virginia
Yeah.
is just way up there. So can you talk a little bit?
Yeah, so you kind of go back to like AOL in Loudoun County, and so you get these companies like that up, they're showing up there, but there's already fiber. There's a lot of fiber that runs because of Northern Virginia and DC. There's a lot of fiber that was there available, and that fiber gets you out across the United States and even into other parts of the world where those cables are coming across. And so it's sort of think of it kind of like Charlottesville has two railroads crossing, it's all that fiber was there. Then tax incentives. So there's all these tax incentives at the state level to bring these companies in. Because they get those incentives, and then, so their pro forma, the developer looks at it and it all works out on paper really well until you ask them to pay for the energy infrastructure, and then it doesn't. It might, but I don't know. But so since those tax incentives are there, there's been legislation, I'm going to mangle this, but there's been legislation in the past where it's like, don't give them a tax incentive unless they come up with a highly sustainable operation, building design. So let's say LEED platinum building, and get something back in not just the tax revenue that's generated. So that's there, and then less expensive energy is another component. So those are the big factors, and then you've got a workforce from not just construction but also from the higher paying jobs to basically design, build, and operate these. They've got a population in Virginia of potential workers that makes it also attractive.
I had a question. What do we know about how the growth of data centers relates to increasing impervious surfaces and our water quality goals for the state? Do we know anything yet?
So that question has been asked. It is addressed. So let's say we'll pick on Albemarle County. There's pretty robust stormwater management and erosion sediment control requirements, whether it's a shopping center or a data center, and all this impervious surface. Some people have talked about, there are other locations where you still have to meet the minimum standards established by the Commonwealth, DEQ's minimum. So even a very rural county still has to have erosion sediment control and stormwater requirements. They may not have the capability of reviewing those projects, and they get handed off, as you know, they get reviewed by the state. Solar projects are like that. They just don't have the capability, but they do need to meet minimum erosion sediment control. Whether those are sufficient, the latest ones, when they can combine stormwater and erosion sediment control, they literally adjusted for solar projects for sure. So some people have said, why aren't these rooftops covered in solar? There are people working on measuring all the impervious surface in every locality in Virginia. So that might be some mitigation. They're not going to power themselves, but they could contribute back to the renewable energy power generation, particularly given we're reckoning real building new lines from coal-fired power plants from the west. So what you get is, let's say, you got 20 data centers and their parking lots in a campus, there's a lot of impervious surface. And so when you see the site plans and the concept plans, you see, just like in a large solar project, a lot of basins, a lot of, constructed facilities to accommodate stormwater. Where it becomes a challenge is in a highly urbanized area. So in Eastern Loudoun, trying to deal with stormwater, a lot of it can be dealt with underground instead of out in the open, and it's being detained and then released.
And then should move on, so we have time for discussion. Okay.
So
we're
good
just
to know
talking
about Savannah.
Yeah, the specifics there. And I just wanted to mention that we have a page now for the regional environmental coordination meetings and the agendas, and we're recording the presentation portion of the meeting. So if you all want to share this with any of your other staff or people who might be interested, if you just go to our main page, I'll share screen. Sec, see if I can take it over. But thank you so much, Rob, for
Yeah.
sharing your expertise. We
Yeah,
really-
absolutely.
we talked-
Thanks for the opportunity. Again, I wish Julie had been here, but
That's perfect.